Good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's SSDA webinar. Just a quick housekeeping item. All attendees are muted during this webinar, so if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen, and our presenters will be happy to answer those for you during and after the webinar. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Jack McLaughlin from PCG.
Thanks, Corey. Appreciate everybody joining us today, and happy end of the year. Some of you may have gotten a jump start on that already. And if you're like me, you're in some ways, very happy that the year has come to a close. But I will say, having worked with many of you and others around the country, I really want to thank you for the work that you've done over the last 3 months specifically. You have one of the toughest jobs. You have done some amazing things as witnessed and observed in our survey, which we're going to share with you today. And with that, we'll just get right to it. Couple of things up front. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yep, we can see it.
All right. I'll go ahead and fire that up. Yeah, thanks again for coming on a Thursday morning. We're going to talk a little bit here. We've got some folks that I'm going to introduce in a minute here. We've got some folks that are going to talk about a recent survey that you all finished for us in a very rapid fashion, and we got an incredible response and some great information that we'll share with you in a minute. And with that survey, with the data that we got from that survey, we were able to put this overarching umbrella around a roadmap of essential actions, because it's real, and you know it's real. We're documenting it, you're living it every day, but now it's time to actually execute. And so we've got folks from Opportunity Labs with us as well. We'll introduce them, and then we'll talk about that at the end. Some of the major topics we're going to talk about today after we do our welcome and introduction, we're going to talk about the survey, the coronavirus survey, which you all participated in. Again, thank you. Then we'll dig right into the roadmap overview and walkthrough. We'll talk about likely scenarios. We'll pause for some Q&A along the way. We won't just wait till the end. We'll actually allow you, if you have a question, to go ahead and type that into the box. You can see some of the chat box and the question box over there on the right-hand side. Type in your questions, and Corey will relay those to us. And then we'll talk about resources and technical assistance that's available to you today. So one thing about what not to expect is that you're going to see a framework, you're going to see a roadmap. The specifics for your exact scenario are not going to be there, but there is a framework, it's adaptable, and there's definitely an opportunity to implement it, and we want to help you do that. We'll talk about that as we go. Our partners in this initiative are Opportunity Labs. We have Andrew and we have Mario. Andrew served as the chief, sorry, my eyes are, he was a White House fellow, but also the chief operating officer for New York City Public Schools, currently working in 6 states. Andrew and Mario are with this roadmap of essential actions we still talk about. Mario also was a White House fellow and served in the as a director of the Office of Pandemic and Emerging Threats. As we all know, this isn't just about academics. This is incredibly wrapped around wellness, health, all of these different social, emotional things that ourselves, our parents, our students are all going through. The next 2 gentlemen I think you're familiar with. Tim Taylor, he's your executive director, former county superintendent, and then we also have Eric, who's going to lead us in the first part of the discussion around the survey, the purpose, the findings, the things that we just crushed and we did really well. I should say you did very well in your schools, and some of the needs that you identified as far as some challenges for the summer and for the reopening of school. Some logistics, I'm going to put you to task real quick, and I really would appreciate this. And don't be shy, but what we're going to do is we're going to use our chat function for a couple of different things to share your reactions and keep the conversation going. We're also going to have Q&A, and again, we'll pause in between sessions, take an intermission for some questions if you have some. And also wanted to let you know that a copy of the PowerPoint that has information you're going to want to revisit or share with others, as well as the coronavirus survey results, a high-level overview of those results. Both of those documents will be available to you following our presentation this morning. So look for an email from Corey regarding those two documents, but you will have access to those. So here we go. We want to get started here. And again, don't be shy. Just so we can kind of get a feel of the folks, since we can't hear you and see you, unfortunately, we would love to hear who you are, what district you're from, and then this is the most important piece. And again, don't be shy. You're amongst peers and friends and folks who are all going to work together, have been working together. But on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident you feel about back to school strategic planning and actually execution and implementation? So 1 would be full-blown panic. We're working on it. We need to get going. 10 being, hey, we're all set. We're good to go. So I'm going to give you a minute. If you go to the right-hand side, you'll see a little chat arrow. If you click on it, the chat box should pop up, and you should be able to type in that information. So I'll just give you a second if you wanted to take a minute to type some stuff in there.
Hey, Jack, while everybody's doing that, a couple of people have asked if you can make the slides larger. If you go under display settings, you should be able to get out of, right now you're in a different mode. Yeah, you want to do swap presenter view and slideshow.
Better?
Yes, now you're in slideshow mode, so now you're perfect.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Of course.
All right, so while you're, go ahead.
I'm just going to let you know some people are commenting in the question box, so I'll be able to field those to you unless you can see them. I don't know if you can see them being your presenter.
All I can see is the chat box. So if you wouldn't mind just, making those available to us later so we can understand the pulse of the group, then that would be great, Corey.
Sure. Well, so far I can tell you, let's see. So we've got between 6.5 and a 7. We've got a couple of 5s. Somebody said yesterday I was a 10. I thought I had it all figured out, and then our neighboring large district is going back full time. So now I'm a 5. Somebody said some days I'm a 1, and others I'm an 8. It just depends. We got an 8, another 7, 6, 7.
Good.
And people, if you're having any attendees, if you're having any trouble finding the chat box, you can use the question box, which a lot of people are using right now, and I'm just kind of fielding those out. Got a lot of 7 and 8s. Some people are saying a 2 or a 3. Information is changing daily and hourly. We're a couple of weeks behind in planning as we got out earlier. So it seems to be a mixed bag out there for sure.
Great, and pretty much, and I can't wait to listen to Andrew and Mario. They've got so much experience across the country working in a lot of rural schools, with a lot of smalls and a lot of rural schools across the country, just to get their feedback on that. So thank you for doing that. We really appreciate it. So I'm going to stop now, turn it over to Eric and Tim, and let them talk about the survey that you all filled out and some of the findings and some of the interesting information that came out of that. So I'm going to go off. I'm going to keep the slideshow on, but I'm going to try to turn off my video, and there we go. Eric.
All right. Hey, I appreciate it, Jack. Thank you very much. And Tim, feel free to jump in whenever you want to as well. Just to kind of let you know who I am, Eric Bonniksen, Superintendent right now with Placerville School District. Excited to be on this webinar today. To go back to the survey question, I would say that over the last 2 to 3 weeks have been at every one of those numbers, 1 through 10. depending on the day, depending on the hour. It changes by the hour, depending on what I read or what comes out of somebody's mouth someplace out of Sacramento. So it changes on a daily basis and an hourly basis. But I think all of us can work together and do what is right for kids, and that's what small school districts do. And I think that's what this survey showed, is that what small school districts do is we work together. We're able to find those mentors and do what's right for kids. And small school districts always do what's right for kids. And I think that's what came out. One thing I want to thank Tim and Jack and having this survey go out, having a survey actually dedicated to small school districts and getting data directly from small school districts, I think is extremely important. And how that transition happened during the closures and what worked really well. And then also some of the needs that small school districts have, I think was really important to have that data out there. A lot of times you hear about what the Big 20 are doing or something like that, but you don't hear a lot directly about what small school districts are doing. And that is what was super important about this survey going out. So thank you guys for doing this. I think it was a pleasure to fill that out. I think when we look at the data and when you're able to dig even deeper into the data, there's a lot that can be learned about what small school districts were able to do. And a lot of people can learn from small school districts on how they were able to make this transition so quickly. And this survey really looked at what worked, what didn't work, and what are the needs? What are needs going forward? So that's kind of where this survey lies and what's going on.
Eric, let me add a couple of things. First of all, this is really a celebration of the hard work, the 185 responses that we got. And to all of you, if we go back to March 13th and when the governor shut everything down, we looked at our members and our heroic leaders and who have dealt with fire, flood, power outages. So they had some practice in this area of shutting down, but they kept the eye on the kids. And what we saw in some of the larger urban, I think someone put out that over 1 million kids did not get any type of services for anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, right? And we would be appalled if that was us, because I think you leaders could not leave your kids hanging that long. And remember, a lot of you didn't even have internet connection, yet you still continue to provide something for the kids, instructional packets, phone calls, whatever it took. So to me, it's a celebration. If we could have a champagne brunch right now, I would, but we got a lot of stuff to do this afternoon. I really am proud of our members and you leaders out there that really said, you know what, we're not going to leave our kids hanging for 4 to 8 weeks, sitting around the house waiting for an educator to call them or get going. So that's what prompted this. We knew you guys were working hard out there, and Jack and his team gave me a call and said, hey, how about we do this to get some data together? And so that's what Eric's going to share with you. And Eric, take it from here, and I'll look forward to watching you in action.
All right, Jack, let's move to the next slide here. Okay, so what did the data show? I think this is really important, and I think this is the what. I think the why is even more important. And the transition from in-classroom instruction to a distance learning type of format, however that format was, actually happened relatively quickly in your small school districts across the state. Averaged 5.3 days. Many districts did it the day school closed or the first day back. And that was, I think that was remarkable that was able to be done. As Tim just mentioned, there were districts that went 4 to 8 weeks, 8 weeks without any type of contact from the school or any type of education going on. I mean, I'm sorry, that's malpractice in my book. You need to have that education. You need to have that contact with kids right away. As far as our district goes, we were ready to go on day 1. Unfortunately, we had a snow day, so we had to wait till day 2, and we got everything out and rolling. Why was it? Why were small school districts able to transition so quickly? I think that's extremely important to take a look at. For one reason, small school districts make decisions and they move on those decisions. We don't need multiple committees and task force to be able to make a decision. We're able to make the decision, move, and roll with things. That's hugely important. We're used to, as Tim mentioned, we're used to being shut down. A lot of small school districts in rural areas. What does that mean? Power companies like to turn off our power. So we're used to power outage days. We're used to those days being turned out. Snow days, fires, unfortunately. So we're used to those type of situations, schools getting closed down. So we're ready. We're ready to roll when that happens. I think that's an important thing for people to remember and for districts to look at and say, how can we be ready to roll knowing these things are going to happen? A couple other things I think that are very important is in your small school districts. I think it's really important that people understand teachers in small school districts are innovators. They're trying new things. They're always looking for what's best for kids. They have those relationships with kids and families. And so they're innovating all the time. And when that innovation happens, it's able to make that transition quickly. Small school districts aren't run off a checklist. And so right there, that innovation's happening. We're out of the box. We're out of the box thinkers, and we're doing what's right for kids. That is shown up in this survey continually. If you look at bullet point 3, I think that is huge. Rate of active participation. Why was the rate of active participation so high in our small school districts across the state? You hear the news reports saying, we had 20, 25, maybe 30% of engagement. Our schools are reporting 80% or more active participation of our kids. Why is that? It is because of the relationships. I know for a fact within our district, there were contacts going out every single day. Teachers were doing video conferencing videos every single day. Students were expected to be engaged every single day. There was that consistency. When there's the consistency, students will stay engaged. When there's not consistency, or when there's an 8-week lag before any consistency happens, there's going to be no engagement. You needed that consistency starting day one. So all of that I think is extremely important to understand and realize. The other thing is that relationship part, I think, was extremely important, and I think that came out high in the survey as well. Teachers were making phone calls, text messages, emails. Principals were making phone calls, text messages, emails. The superintendents of the school were making phone calls, text messages, emails to families. Personal contact. Personal contact leads to engagement, and that was shown continually through this survey and continually through small school districts across the state. The other thing I wanted to touch on just briefly is the relationship small school districts have with their bargaining units, because it's a collaboration. In many small school districts up and down the state, the relationship between the district, the superintendent, the bargaining units, it's a collaboration. They're working together. They're not sitting on opposite sides of the table. They're sitting next to each other. We developed an MOU for us to move into this distance learning. We sat down at the table and had signatures on the MOU in 7 minutes, because we knew what was important, and what was important was the kids, not so much the MOU. And we moved forward and were able to get that working right away. So I think all of that is what leads to this data that you see. Academic achievement. Why was academic achievement so high, especially in your small school districts? Goes back to the bullet point right above it. Students were engaged. Students were ready to go early, ready to go on day one. They were engaged through the whole process. So significant academic achievement was not lost. Also, when there's daily contact with peers, daily contact with your teacher, daily contact with your principal, the social emotional needs of the students are being met better than if that contact and those relationships are not there. all of that plays out in this survey, and it shows itself very strongly here. Anything you want to add to that, Tim? Okay, we're moving on. Let's move on to the last slide here, and this goes into the needs. All right. Some of the needs are the same in small districts as in your larger districts, but some of them are a little bit different. And I think the strengths that we see, the wins that we saw out of this survey because of small districts, translate into some of those needs that small districts have as well. If you look at this, need for professional development, need for guiding and instructional practices into distance learning, needing to help design type of programs as far as how we're going to roll out come August or September, how those programs are going to roll are extremely important in small school districts for one important reason. Typically in your small school districts, you have one person doing all of that. You have a principal superintendent, or you have a superintendent with maybe one principal. They're doing all of that. They are your curriculum director. They are your technology director. They are the one overseeing the budget. They are the one developing the curriculum. Okay, so they are the ones then filling out whatever report Sacramento decides they want to have at the last minute. You know, all of those things are that one person doing. And so the need for support, the need for that collaboration is extremely important for small school districts. And that's what really came out in the needs, is the need for that outside support, some extra support in helping, not replacing what's being done in the school, in each school, but helping them develop and enhance what they're doing in the schools to meet the needs and be able to flow whatever the system is that we're going to have to roll out come August or September. So those were really the needs that came out were specifically based on, because of the small situation, it's one person, maybe two people doing it all. And so needing that collaboration, that help, that expertise coming in from the outside is really what stood out in this survey as important for your small school districts. The other part here was on the budget, and I know that there's a budget agreement going on, and I know that Tim has definitely some insights on where budgets and how that's relating to small school districts. So hopefully sometime in this presentation he'll be able to get in and talk a little bit about how the budget play is both helping and hindering what small school districts are able to do. The last point in the needs really is the infrastructure. And the need for the technology infrastructure, especially in your rural areas. I mean, I have areas in my district where I have a significant number of kids that have zero connectivity, that have zero, not just internet connectivity, cell phone connectivity. And so I could be given hotspots. That doesn't help if there's no cell phone connectivity. There needs to be, and I know the state's working on this, but there needs to be a concerted effort to get connectivity to all parts of our state of California. We're supposedly in the epicenter of technology in this state. That should be across the state in all aspects, every corner up and down the state. The technology and connectivity is there. And so that came out very strongly also in this survey, especially in your small rural areas. Connectivity was a significant issue. So with that, I know that the rest of this survey, the more detailed parts of this survey are going to be coming out later today. I want to thank everybody that participated, filled out this survey. Your comments, the information you gave is extremely important, and I think will be very helpful moving into the future as legislation, as policies being presented, because this information is needed. One last comment, and then Tim, I think I know you have a couple things you want to talk about too. But one last comment I have is I think it's extremely important, as this survey has pointed out, that when the governor, when the legislature are developing legislation, small school districts need to be at the forefront of those discussions. They need to be part of the discussions, and they need to be one of the first calls that are being made as discussions are going on. When CDE is making policy and driving policy, small school districts need to be at the forefront of those discussions as well. Because as you can see, amazing things are happening in small school districts. They're able to innovate, they're able to transition quickly. And so they need to be part of those discussions at the forefront of all discussions that are happening, both at the legislative level and CDE level. So thank you very much. I appreciate everybody that was able to be part of this survey. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, just to kind of wrap up, first of all, Jack, kudos. I love that picture. I want to go to that classroom. Look at those wooden desks. Looks beautiful. Looks like it's up north somewhere. Hey, just a couple of quick things. One, yeah, on the budget run, let's be real here. Our governor listened to legislatures and the field, and we're not going to take that 8 to 14% cut that we were looking at in May. So very much thankful for that, because I don't know how we would have done it. I think the second thing, though, we're all frustrated, especially myself, about, and you should be too. I don't like the way they're distributing the CARES funding, because they're using data from February, the P2, which is pre-COVID. So they're not including the 8 million Californians who, a lot of them are parents who lost their jobs, who had to deal with COVID, who and to me that's like taking what I would consider like the campfire, where the state let us reopen our window to designate our students, right? They didn't say, hey, let's just use the data from before. Let's reopen that window. You guys put in the 5,000 homeless kids you now have. I don't know why we didn't get to do that. But we're fighting that. We're still trying to work with the governor's office on that, because it makes no sense. And then the last thing, and this is the most important one, you guys, you can see the data says you're all trying to figure out what to do when you reopen, right? And no one has all the answers. If I think Andrew and Mario are going to give you some very good guidance, but I think even they would say this is a new territory. When you have the PGA Tour and the MLB, these are organizations that have billions of dollars. They have all the right equipment, all the testing. And yet after 2 tournaments, we have golfers now with testing positive, caddies and others. And those aren't little kids. These are adults that should be able to follow guidelines more. Very interested to see what you guys are going to offer along these lines, and how everybody's going to deal with children, teachers, and classrooms, because golf, hello, is outside. Yet there's still cases that are popping up in billion-dollar industries. And so I think it's good to hang on, listen to these 2 guys. And thanks for being here, you guys. I really appreciate it. And California needs your help. So thanks so much. And but Jack, back to you. I'm gonna give the microphone over to you. Thanks,
Eric and Tim. Thank you so much. I want everybody just to focus in on that last bullet you see there. That 82% of administrators. That's you guys expressing a need for guidance in designing a hybrid plan. If you look at the bullets above it, you can actually make a case that they all fit under that big umbrella, right? So what's this going to look like from a health perspective, from wellness, from academics, from facilities, maintenance, transportation, all that stuff. So all of these things can actually fit underneath this, which is why we're so pumped up and excited that we've got Mario and Andrew here who are doing this across the country. They've got an incredibly great framework and roadmap, and I'm excited for them to share that with you now. I will say that when they're done with their portion of it, I'm going to post a link that to a Google document that if you want some more information, you're going to be able to fill it out real quick. It's just your name, email address, basically. If you want some more information, if you want some follow-up, please click on that and fill out that form, and we'll get back to you quickly. So that'll be available after Andrew and Mario are done. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. Let's see here. There we go. Did that work?
Perfect. We appreciate you, Jack, and thank everybody not only for joining us this morning, but also for all of your work this school year and in preparation for fall 2020. So just a bit of context on who I am. As Jack mentioned, I'm the former chief operating officer of the public schools in New York City. I led 5 cycles of school opening for 1.1 million kids, which is quite different, but has a number of commonalities, I think, in opening schools in small districts. And I also led the district's response to Hurricane Sandy. So have some muscle memory relative to education, emergency operations. So when coronavirus started to manifest early this year, we were concerned that the guidance from the federal government was coming down too slow, particularly around how to handle closing schools, but also really just keeping school communities safe. And so we open sourced a document that was really based on some of my experience in New York City and some of Mario's experience, and Mario will jump in here in a second and introduce himself. And that document probably got 500 questions sent to our emails in the first week. And based on those questions, we brought a team of public health and education practitioners together with 2 goals in mind. The first was really to instigate a conversation about how hard and different really return to in-person instruction would be in the fall. And then secondarily, to create a forcing function for states to provide the guardrails for LEAs and schools to begin to plan and implement in earnest for the fall. And that work manifested in the Return to School Roadmap. And effectively what the roadmap is a list of essential actions across core functional areas, both at the district level and at the school level. And so, as you toggle through the roadmap, if you're interested in what you should be thinking about from a facilities perspective, there is a section on that specifically for districts and specifically for schools and school leaders. You can go to the next slide. I think Jack's around. Great. So the big takeaway from this is the roadmap is based on evidence. We really tried to use data to inform what is in here, and that was particularly important relative to the public health piece because there are so many unknowns. And so with that, let me pause and pass it to Mario to introduce himself. I think it's an opportune moment for him to jump in and talk a little bit about how we approached thinking about public health given those uncertainties.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. So it's nice to meet you all. Thanks for having us. My name is Mario Ramirez, as Andrew mentioned. By background, I'm an emergency medicine physician, and I'm actually still practicing clinically and taking care of active COVID patients pretty frequently. And when I'm not working in the ER, I work with Andrew at Opportunity Labs. But my professional background was in kind of preparing for pandemic threats, although most of us thought that it was going to be an influenza virus and not a coronavirus. But I think as Jack mentioned in the intro, I'd spent some time at U.S. Health and Human Services, serving as their pandemic and emerging threats coordinator and doing a lot of international coordination. And so when we were building the roadmap, one of the things that we really wanted to set was something of a North Star and what was going to guide our approach to return to school planning. And in that sense, to Andrew's point, we wanted to lean in on public health as what we think is the critical driver of whether or not it's safe to send students back to school. There are, certainly lots of politics around this issue. And, one of my mentors told me once that, you can have a good plan, but if it's not politically acceptable, then you still don't have a plan. And so what we tried to do was create guidance that is rooted in sound public health guidance, but that also is both politically feasible and takes into consideration realities on the ground when it comes to implementation. I grew up in South Texas in a small district myself, and I know about the constraints that go into learning in those sorts of environments. And so what we did was create a series of essential actions that were designed to create something of a incident command structure for educators as they get back to kind of return to school planning, because what we think is that there's probably an infinite number of ways that this plays out over the next several months. And so you've got to create a system that is adaptable and flexible to those things. You know, it's almost impossible to plan for, you know, what we've heard from some folks are 12 or 15 or even 20 different learning scenarios. And so we try to create a flexible structure, but with clear guardrails that give you an idea about what to do in different areas. And so, you know, in line with that, the framework that we put together is designed to sort of expand just beyond SARS-CoV-2, you know, and ideally should be folded into your school's emergency operations planning. But you know, certainly this pandemic, I think, stretches outside the norms of normal emergency operations planning. And so in that sense, there are some specifics that we can get into. Next slide. And so, you know, one of the things that we have heard before and that we keep hearing from school leaders is they need an idea of how to adapt and how to understand what is going on with the pandemic to their local circumstance. Because as we all know, what is happening at any given moment can vary greatly from place to place. So what the pandemic looks like in California today looks different from what's going on in New York. What's happening in Texas looks different than what's happening in Minnesota. And so we've heard over and over again that school leaders should expect rolling closures, but the question is, how do you make those decisions? And one of the things that we've heard over and over again is that some state leaders are going to make those decisions at the gubernatorial level. Other folks have said they're going to push it out to the school district level. And so within that, I thought it might be, you know, worth just mapping what we think are kind of the three scenarios that we see on planning as far as the pandemic unfolds, and then how you should actually think about, you know, deciding whether or not it's safe to operate and how you should do it. So we think that the pandemic is likely to stretch for the next 18 to 24 months, although that's really probably closer to 12 to 18 months. When we first started talking about this back in January, it was 18 to 24 months. Now 6 months have gone by and we've got some progress on the medical side of things. But the specific scenarios within that most people agree about is that you're going to have a series of waves with a kind of a certain amount of infection in any given area. And the first scenario is what they call the one and done scenario, where you have kind of an initial peak and then the virus sort of fades away, either because people develop immunity or the virus mutates or we get better at treating it. I think we are in the process of disproving this scenario and don't really expect that that's going to be the case anytime soon. Scenario two is really the one that I think everybody's worried about and that's getting a lot of time in the press right now, which is that we're going to have a smaller initial peak in the spring like we had, and that in the fall we may have a much larger second wave. That's what's happened historically with a couple of different pandemic outbreaks, particularly the 1918 flu. But inherent in that is the idea that you actually get past your first peak, which the US is, in full disclosure, having a really hard time doing right now. We've sort of hit a plateau and it started to go back up in some ways. And then scenario three is sort of a series of rolling waves where the virus sort of ebbs and flows at relatively equal amplitudes. And that may in fact be where this settles if we can get this thing under control. But we think it's really likely that folks are going to see this again. Next slide. And so then within that, right, as the school leader, you have to make some educated decision about whether or not you can open up school to in-person teaching, which is certainly preferable from a learning perspective, but probably increases your risk to COVID exposure to its highest degree. And then you can also opt to keep students at home completely, but there's plenty of evidence that that's not the ideal scenario for school teaching, and kind of has the worst learning retention, but certainly minimizes the risk of COVID infection. And what we're going to end up trying to operate essentially is a sort of like middle range, which may end up being a hybrid model. It may end up being partly in person, partly at home. And I think some of that is still to be determined. But within that, we think that there are specific public health indicators that people should be using. And there's a couple of different ones. You can use what's called the R0, or the basic reproductive number, or the number of persons that each person is spreading the virus to get a sense for how much virus is in your local community. But some smaller areas don't actually calculate that number. It's like an epidemiologic calculation. And so in other areas, you can use the fraction of positive tests or the number of hospitalizations. But certainly that's data that's getting a little further back from the traditional education wheelhouse. So with that, let me pass it back to Andrew for just a second.
Yeah, so wanted to talk a little bit before we open it up for questions about the work we're doing across the country, really with SEAs at the moment, just in terms of sequencing. So we are helping 6 states, Louisiana, Rhode Island, Delaware, Michigan, Nebraska, and Alabama with their return to school planning across public health, inclusive of safety protocols, instruction, and operations. And because I like alliteration, I'm just going to talk about quickly takeaways, trends, and tasks. So on big takeaways from that work, the first is, and this is not a surprise, I think, to anyone on this call, that there's just massive variation in state education agency response because it is tied at the hip to health infrastructure. And because of thousands of decisions over hundreds of years, public health infrastructure looks very different from state to state and from community to community. And to Mario's point, you know, some states that are collecting data at the zip code level, while other states aren't collecting that very same data at the state level even. And so how, as an LEA, you are going to think about school opening decisions and how schools open should be predicated on public health, but working to understand where your community is from a public health perspective is going to vary pretty substantially based on where you are. I think the second thing is there's so much talk about the model. Are we cohorting kids? Are we doing AB schedules? And I think, you know, particularly for small districts, it's really about how you manage, right? And the capacity that you have locally to implement. And so we actually think that the conversation about the model should come after considerations about where you are from a community perspective as it pertains to health, and then also what your capacity looks like on the ground. So those are some core takeaways from our work across states. Some big trends that we've seen, particularly around safety protocols. We've seen most states, and California is no exception, err on the side of recommending things but not requiring them, which I think puts LEAs, you and your peers and school leaders in a bind trying to figure out what is on balance most feasible and best protects the safety of your school community. And so from busing to social distancing to facial coverings to screening and testing, we've seen most of the recommendations become guidance and not requirements in those buckets. We have strong feelings on where there is room to provide some flexibility and still preserve public health. And I think one example is the CDC recommends that bus utilization should be at 50%, or there should be social distancing on buses. We don't think that's feasible, right, in any district. And there are certain things that we think you can do to keep kids and staff members and bus drivers safe on buses. And so there's sort of a number of give and takes from a trend analysis perspective in those social distancing and safety related protocols that we've seen. And I think the last thing before I pause and we take questions is just tasks. The thing that we have heard again and again from your peers is that there is tons of power in starting with an inventory, if you haven't already, to collect core data that will help you make decisions about return to school. And so, like, just as an example, understanding what, from a facilities perspective, your campus would yield. So how many classrooms do you have? How large are they? Are they vented and have windows that could open or have airflow? How many desks are usually in them? Is there one door? Is there two doors? From a transportation perspective, how many kids ride the bus? How many kids are dropped off by their parents? How many kids walk to school? What does your campus design look like in terms of vehicles and spacing? These are the kind of like core data points that can help you make decisions down the road. And so doing the upfront inventorying work is really, really critical. It is just something we've heard again and again. One of the tasks that I think has held a lot of folks up in their planning that seems to be pretty consistent across states and local geographies is the fact that there's not a lot of clarity on what to do with a student who opts out unilaterally from school, who doesn't have an underlying health condition and might not qualify for an appropriate accommodation. And there's a big open question there, right? That informs a lot of your planning. And so we think the answer to that question relevant to staff is becoming more clear based on evolving case law coming out of healthcare. But that is one sort of task that is a big constraint in planning return to school that we have seen across jurisdictions. So Jack and Corey, let me pause there. I want to just retain the last 12 minutes for questions really on anything we mentioned. It could be the roadmap, could be what we're seeing in states, could be questions specifically for Mario about what protocols he thinks are most optimal from a public health perspective and balance feasibility at the local level. We're really open to any questions that this group has.
Right, well, let's see. So far, we've got one question in. Somebody asked, are you seeing any general data about how many families might be choosing not to return to school in person?
Yeah, only anecdotally, but the numbers that we're seeing in states that we're working in are between 10 and 30%, generally. And I should say, the numbers of staff members who may opt out tend to be in that same range. One of the things that we recommend doing in the roadmap is surveying your families and about return to school and what their plans are. Obviously, not mandatory, but I think will give folks a good sense of how folks are planning for the fall based on what the current public health situation is.
I need you to calm him down. I need you to calm the dog down. Oh.
So let's see, another question we have is public health officers seem to be the critical partner. Any strategy for working with them as they aren't educators and don't necessarily have school level experience?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I would say that has been one of the sort of most complex points in our work. So one of the things that we stress in the roadmap is that you have to set up a continuing cadence to meet with these folks early in your process, because you're right. As health professionals, we have an inherent bias to lean on the side of safety as the most important driver of decision making. And we typically work from the position that even one bad outcome is too many, but that can't realistically be the situation if they try to get kids back to school. And so you have to find a way to sort of, explain those concerns to public health folks and find a way to meet sort of not necessarily in the middle, but I think find a partner who can tell you really where the absolute red lines are and sort of what you can do in the constraints of the system that you're working in. But then also importantly, find a partner who can help you message what it is that you're trying to do.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Somebody asked, where can I find the roadmap?
Yeah, it's returntoschoolsroadmap.org. And one of the things that we are adding to the roadmap pretty much daily is plans that are either informed by the roadmap or plans that we are working on directly. And so there's a tab at the top of the roadmap where you can actually see both state and district level plans that are utilizing sort of core tenets of the roadmap and implementing based on some of those things. I think Jack or Corey is pulling it up now.
Yeah. I was just say maybe worth, Andrew, just talking about what exactly the states are that we're working in, right? So there's Michigan, Alabama, Rhode Island, Louisiana, Delaware, Teach for America, the city of Nashville, and a few others. And what, I think our work with them has been about kind of getting past the sort of strategy level document that is the return to school roadmap and getting to the kind of operational piece of this and how you actually operationalize that. So we're working in those areas to create the public health checklists and the frameworks so that, when folks look at this, they say, how do I launch a return to school committee? Our work has given them the exact 1, 2, 3 steps to do that.
Yeah, and look, we know, I think Jack pulled it up, or maybe Corey. We know one size doesn't fit all, particularly for smaller districts who have to innovate. But we think that this set of work is a really good foundation to scaffold on, right? And so there are everything that is in the roadmap is accessible in principle in a checklist format, and a lot of stuff won't apply. But we think there are some commonalities across districts that will apply and can be helpful in your planning. And I should just add, we are a 501c3, we're a nonprofit, and so everything that we're doing here, the expectation for us is that it becomes a public good, so that folks aren't reinventing the wheel. And so that is why the roadmap itself was entirely funded by philanthropy, and we are open sourcing all of the plans that are devolved from and come out of the roadmap, or a result of work we're doing directly with states.
Excellent. Well, we're definitely getting a couple more questions, so let's see. So next question, what would be a recommended time frame for a school closure when there have been positive cases in the school? I'm seeing some districts looking at, sorry, I've got to scroll a little bit, looking at school closures for a minimum of 2 days to a deep cleaning to over 14 days to deal with incubation stages.
Yeah.
Incubation stage of COVID.
So it's a good question. So it's a sort of multi-level question. So the first point is that I think that the CDC has 2 to 5 days as their recommended time frame, but they derive that from a couple of specific things. So what we recommend in the roadmap is that you have to really tightly control facility access, because you have to try to minimize the risk that you have a true exposure like that in your school. And one of the things that you really have to do in the schools themselves is diminish the risk that it becomes a high risk exposure, which is somebody who is not wearing a mask or not using any sort of barrier protection and then is walking around a campus. Because when that happens, that is when you have to close schools for as little as 2 days, but often as long as 5 days to decontaminate the areas that they're in. A full 14-day closure isn't necessary, because our best figure at this point is that the virus only persists for 48 to 72 hours on hard surfaces, which is different than the incubation time. So the incubation time is how long the virus persists in a living individual, but that's a separate question about keeping somebody out of school, not how long you need to keep your school closed.
Excellent. And then we have a transportation related question. What do you recommend for students coming to school on a bus full of students? Do we check their temperature when they arrive at the school, or do we do something prior to boarding the bus?
Yeah, so on screening, on temperature checks, and I'm going to let Mario jump in, but we don't recommend temperature checks at all. And I'll let Mario jump in and tell you why from a public health perspective, and then I can talk through what we are recommending to keep kids and staff safe on buses.
Yeah, so as a screening measure to determine whether or not somebody may be infected with COVID, spot temperature checks are actually, I think, one of the worst things that you can do for a couple of reasons. And it has to do with how accurate the tools are and what the likelihood that your test is actually accurate. So for most temporal scanners that people are purchasing, they're maybe 98 to 99% accurate in the best case scenario, but typically tend to be around 70 to 75% accurate in the wild. But if your pre-test prevalence of disease is only like 3 to 4%, which is probably higher than it is in school-age children, the likelihood that you get a false result is very, very high. So statistically, in those two parameters, the likelihood that your test is falsely positive is over 50%. And so what that creates is a scenario where you're getting a bunch of false readings in kids as they're getting onto the bus, when in fact, none of them are actually infected. And so that, of course, has downstream effects about what you do with those folks. Do you then have to isolate all the people who are exposed to that person? It's truly just not an accurate screening measure for whether or not people are infected. The other sort of logistical point of that, right, is that people can spread the disease for up to 5 days before they ever develop their first fever. So a much more accurate way to screen people for disease is to have them check their temperatures at home every morning so that you get a true temperature curve under the sort of right kind of constant conditions. But doing it on a bus is one of the worst things you can do from an actual screening perspective.
Yeah,
But
so
Corey,
sorry, one other point. It is a political consideration, however, which is to say that sometimes we do things because the community demands it. But I think it's because people have a hard time understanding what the science is behind that, and we need to do a better job communicating that, because I think it creates much bigger problems than it actually solves.
hey, Corey, can I, since we're running on our last couple of minutes here, can I recommend that we have because this is great conversation, and we definitely want to continue the conversation. And so we have here and Corey, if you could put this into the chat box or send this out to the attendees, it would be awesome. We have a form here that you can fill out where we would be happy to continue the conversation and keep talking. And again, you've got contact information here for Andrew and Mario and for myself. So if you want to fill out that form, it's super simple. There's like 3 or 4 fields. We'll get back to you. These are some of the things that we've been asked to provide as far as technical assistance to the districts, and we would be happy to do this with you together as a team. So you can, I won't go through these, I won't read them, you can read them, but basically help you create that physical operational checklist that Mario and Andrew and their peers and practitioners have put together, and then personalize that for you because it looks a little bit different. We know for everybody, we've got quality blended instructor program to help our teachers shift from brick and mortar to distance educators, as most of you are doing right now. And if you need more help doing that, we have great programs based on national standards to do that. Return to school planning, specifically as it relates to public health. I think some of those questions came out today. Mario, thank you for addressing those. One thing that I think is interesting is that we know that some of our kids are being poached. Some of our parents are saying, well, if we're going to do online learning, then let's put them in an online school. We obviously don't favor that. We like the community feel. We like the support of our community. I think it's important to our kids. We are actually creating marketing campaigns or messaging campaigns, literally videos, other brochures, trifolds. We're developing campaigns for districts that they can send out to their constituents, their parents, their communities, talk to them about the benefits of and what it's going to look like when their kids come back to school. We're doing a lot of that across the country. And then, of course, this whole idea about coherence and equity of our governance structures and how we build those, and obviously want to help with those things as well. And there's other things we can do too, as you can imagine. So, but these are some of the technical assistance pieces that we're doing. Hopefully you can have an opportunity to fill out that form. We would love to keep talking and continue the conversation. And with that, I think our time's up. And
Hey,
again,
Jack, let me interject. First of all, it's refreshing to hear from two very smart guys. You guys must have gone to Chico State like me, so. But I was on the team that did the guidelines for the state, and it was a super politically charged process because we were with management and labor, right? So we got stuck in the weeds too much. I don't know if you guys have done a side-by-side to look at that, but that's what our schools are asked to use. And then they have the county offices that have put together some stuff. I thought Sacramento's and San Bernardino's look pretty strong. But again, these are huge 40 to 80 page documents. And no small district. Once things get going, our smalls aren't going to have time. They don't have a plethora of people to do that. But I don't know if you've looked at the California guidelines. I'm sure if you did a rubric or something and said waste of time, that doesn't matter. That temperature thing you just mentioned we're at attention, right? Because every district's out there trying to buy these fancy temperature things. Yeah. And I think it makes people feel better. But what you're saying, it's especially with kids. I mean, how many kids are playing for a half hour to 45 minutes before school, shooting hoops and running around and raising hell, and then we give them a temperature. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
I'll give you a quick anecdotal story, Tim. So I have an 8-year-old who goes to a summer camp and was riding in the back of my car, on a hot day, but we had the air conditioning on. And the problem with temperature scanners is that they measure skin temperature. So he was sitting in the back seat with the sun sort of coming through the window. We got to the bus drop off and they checked his temperature and they said it was 102, but he looks totally fine. So the teacher puts her hand on his forehead and says, go sit in the shade for a few minutes, and then goes back and puts her hand on his forehead again and then checks his temperature again. And of course it comes down, it was normal. He didn't have COVID. But at that point, if she then went back to the bus, she would have infected everybody, right? Or, it's just, it creates huge downstream problems that I don't think people really think about, when you actually operationalize these things.
Yeah, the other thing, and we can close on this, and maybe our members want to hear more from you guys, maybe after the 4th of July holiday, because I think everybody's trying to get a little time off. But I always felt too, I went to a restaurant, I said this to everybody, and a guy, they had 2 people walk around with a clipboard, and they were like the COVID checklist, like you see at a gas station, we cleaned it at 10:15. It would be nice to have a checklist of what you could have. Like you could even empower kids to do that, and maybe someone who provides for the teacher the data to ensure things are filled up. The teacher's got the mask on, what's going on in the playground, because otherwise it's a guess. And I don't know if you guys have a checklist like that or could create one. Obviously some of us off the guidelines, but it's more about, okay, you're at the school site, what would the clipboard look like? And that again, that creates a good data points for the superintendent to make some decisions. And as you know, if you empower a kid like that, they'll snitch out Mr. Taylor in a heartbeat who's not following the rules in the classroom, right? They'll be the tattletales or data people. So very great conversation with you guys. We'd like to probably do more. And I would like to talk to you guys about doing more with some of our other associations. We work with AXA and the Charter School Association who need this because they're the ones serving the 6 million kids too. So thanks so much, you guys. Really appreciate it. Jack, thank you too.
Hey, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate
it. And Jack, I hope the weather's terrible in Santa Cruz, man. You guys have a good day.
Thanks.
All right. Have a good one.
See ya.
Thank you all so much for attending. Have a great day.